When we talk about the global economy, we're really talking about this set of superstars. These superstars do most of the innovation. These superstars do most of the international trade. They lead a lot of our growth, massive employment, highly profitable, not so much tax.
Those are hard-earned tax dollars that you or I have earned that have now been stolen by someone else.
Companies often exploit regulations to tweak the information.
But how do you get information on what is attempted hidden?
You have to use kind of detective methods and try to be creative with the data that exists.
What do Singapore, the Netherlands, and the Bahamas have in common? They are what is known as tax havens. Simply put, tax havens are places where individuals and companies can hide money and avoid taxes at home.
We think about tax havens as having a few common characteristics. One is they tend to be very stable places, very secure places to hold your money. The second is they tend to have very low tax rates.
Secrecy is the third and perhaps most important characteristic of tax havens. Let's take a look at the US as an example.
The US is often thought of as a tax haven nowadays because it's very easy to own assets in the US anonymously because you can easily start an anonymous company in the US.
Oftentimes, these anonymous companies are shell companies with no physical address, property, or employees. Shell companies allow money to be hidden from tax authorities.
There are certain federal states, such as Delaware or Wyoming, that allow very easy shell company registration and also provide financial secrecy. So there, for example, you can find office buildings with dozens of shell companies registered, but that don't have any economic activity.
Let's look more closely at Wyoming. Wyoming has only about 600,000 people and is very agricultural. There are literally twice the amount of cows as there are people. Yet Wyoming has almost 1.2 million companies registered. That's 2 companies per person, or 1 per cow. This sounds like a load of considering that nowhere else in the US are there so many companies per person. But that's the kind of strange thing that happens in tax havens. Although both individuals and companies use them, for now, let's focus on how corporations take advantage of tax havens.
These are corporations that operate in different countries. They have factories in Norway, they have consumers in Europe and so on. But when you look at the data, what you see is that they book their profits not in Norway, not in Germany, but in a handful of low or zero tax places like the Cayman Islands, or like relatively low tax places in Europe like Ireland.
So when we talk about data for tax havens, there's 2 interesting things that happen. One is if you look at the profitability of the foreign companies there, it's off the charts. You know, take the average US firm, maybe about 50,000 in profits per worker. In a tax haven like Bermuda or the Cayman Islands is closer to 32 million. They look ridiculously profitable for the real activity that's happening there.
When a multinational enterprise moves their profits to tax havens, it's called profit shifting. Let's take a real-world example.
So you've got a company like Starbucks, and they have a shop in a high-tax location like Norway, and then they've got part of their company in a low-tax place like the Bahamas, where there's a zero tax. Well, what they do is they pay themselves for the right to use the mermaid logo on the cups in Norway. And what that does is it moves money from Norway to where there is no tax. So Starbucks globally essentially doesn't pay any taxes.
Starbucks is just one example out of many. Brands that most of us use every day are suspected to be engaged in profit shifting.
Most of what multinationals do is not illegal. It's playing off 2 different sets of rules. There's legal and there's fair. It's perfectly legal. Fairness is a little bit slipperier.
If it's not technically illegal, is profit shifting actually a problem?
The frustrating thing is when you find out that the most productive, most profitable companies out there just don't pay taxes, why would I bother paying taxes? It erodes that faith in the system. And once that faith starts to erode, things can collapse very quickly.
Tax haven directly affect us and directly affect the capacity of our governments to collect revenues.
That means that there's less money for governments to spend on things like social services, on health and education services for their populations.
The other issue is, where does the money that's not going to the government end up? Some of it ends up in people's pockets as higher wages. So Skadaforsk has done research there. Turns out the rich get richer. So there's that part of it. It increases inequality.
So how can we rein in these enormous companies?
Basically, there are two big ways you can combat it. So one is just public perception. If you don't like it, don't buy their stuff. The second way is, if it's legal, change the laws.
I'm happy to say that there's been a lot of progress now as it has been put in place what we call country-by-country reporting, where companies have to report on a country-by-country basis, where they book their profits, their employees, their assets, their revenues.
To tackle profit shifting, researchers first need to find out how much profit is being shifted and where.
When you look at their profits in those countries, they are enormous relative to the wages that they pay to their employees in those countries. So by looking at this ratio of profits divided by wages, you can create a map of where multinational companies shift their profits and avoid taxes.
The Atlas of the Offshore World maps which countries win and which lose from profit shifting. Check it out and see what kind of difference you can make.